Okay, we're going to start with the start. I would say 80% of my questions and people's concerns and difficulties with making the bread all has to do with the start, because this is the lifeblood of your bread. It's the heart and soul, and so and it's just different than using yeast. So it takes a little bit of learning. So don't be frustrated if you make mistakes. You may think your start is dead. It's not. And so I'm going to give you all the ins and outs of starts. Here we go. Starts are fascinating. All right. So as I mentioned, you make a start by bringing flour and water together and feeding it every day. And it takes about 7 days to make a start. If you want to make your own start, totally do it. But I suggest you just take mine. Because mine's from a San Francisco bakery. It's 160 years old. I've used starts from Alaska. I've used starts that came across the plains. This one far and away outperforms those starts. Great flavor. It is sour, so it came from San Francisco. It is a sour taste. If you do not want sour, Dr. Christensen, he's a chiropractor in Payson. He gives out a start that is from Czechoslovakia. It is sweet. So if you don't want sour bread, go and get his start, because you can eat that and no sour at all. Dr. Christensen, Kyle Christensen, he's on that back Salem Road. You go to Payson. He's in a business complex back there, his office. But he has great starts. So starts are very interesting. They take on the characteristics of the atmosphere of where they're grown and established. So even though my start has been in Utah for about 7 years, people say, oh, it's taken on the bacteria of Utah. It's no longer a San Francisco start. That's only true if it got started in San Francisco, then immediately came to Utah. When you have an established start, it stays established. Why? Because that bacteria kills anything foreign that comes in contact with it. So if it's been in San Francisco for 150 years, it's going to come to Utah, and that Utah bacteria is going to say, "Oh, I don't recognize you," and it's like in Finding Nemo. And they go to the tank, and there's that one OCD fish that cleans everything. That's what the bacteria does. If it's anything foreign, they're cleaning it, they're getting rid of it. In fact, we used to do the Colonial Festival in Orem. That's part of the Freedom Festival. You guys should go this year. It's really awesome. But they recreate. It's the largest recreation of a colonial city west of the Mississippi. It's really great. We ran the bakehouse, but the health department has to come because you're there selling bread. They came one year and there was a thing of sourdough dough uncovered. Freaked out. What are you doing? This is uncovered. It's open to the air. I'm like, it's sourdough. And he goes, oh, okay. You're fine then. And you throw dirt on it and it's okay. Why? Because the bacteria is going to clean any foreign bacteria, anything foreign that comes in contact with it. So that's why I can have a Czechoslovakian start, and it stays Czechoslovakian. In fact, there's a great place called Classic Sourdough. It's a website. You can order starts from places all over the world, and they taste different. They have different flavors to them: tangy, sweet, tart. All of these different things because of where they come from. So there's just something about San Francisco, that bay that maybe traps the moisture in, that makes amazing, fantastic sourdough start. In fact, it has its own name. They've named that bacteria Lactobacilli san franciscus because it is just so incredible. And so that's what this start is. So if you like the sour, take my start. If you want something that is just sweet, go get one. Or maybe make your own, or go get that Czechoslovakian start. Now on your paper, it says resources. The first thing there, it says yoursourdoughstart.com. That's one of our websites. We have blog on there, blog posts. We have the most amazing blogger. There's one, 7 days to a sourdough start, that will show you how to make your own start. But that website also has amazing recipes for anything sourdough that you want to make. Because if you or anyone in your household have health issues and can't do wheat, you're not just going to want to make bread. You're going to want to make sourdough cookies and sourdough cake and sourdough naan and noodles, and the possibilities are endless with what you can make with sourdough. That blog has great recipes on there. Just go in and search stuff, and it's not on yours?
No, it's on the second page.
It's on the second page. I tried to, it's not resources or not. Okay, just write it down. yoursourdoughstart.com. My picture will be on there, but just look at the blog, and there'll be great, great recipes. So let's talk about making your start. We're gonna make some start here. Not gonna make it. We're going to refresh it. So there's a couple of terms you need to know. Feed, refresh, activate. That's what happens when you give your start flour and water. You're activating the bacteria and the yeast by giving them food, because, okay, so here I have a start that's been sitting in my refrigerator. Looks pretty dense. I see the liquid that's separated. Here I have a start that is active. You can see the bubbles through it. It's very different. So this is an active start. This is an inactive start because the bacteria and the yeast are hibernating. When they don't have any food to eat, they just basically go to sleep. And so that's why we call it activating or feeding your start, because you're giving it to them, and then as soon as they eat it, they're going to activate. They're going to produce the bubbles and the lactic acid, and your start's going to double in size. Okay, so let's see. I am sending you home with a start. So you're going to want to take this when you get home, and you're going to want to feed it. And if you have to put it in the fridge, don't put it in this. Put it in, well, this is food grade plastic, I guess you could, but don't let it sit for too long. You definitely want to feed it. So this is how you feed your start. People get so confused by this. It's really very simple. However much start you have, you're going to double that amount for your flour and water. So right here, I would say that's 2 tablespoons. So you're going to go home and you're going to add 2 tablespoons. Doubled is 1/4 of a cup, right? 4 tablespoons. You're going to add 1/4 of a cup of water and 1/4 of a cup of flour. You're going to mix it up, and you're going to put it in a mason jar like this with a lid on it. So that's how you feed or activate your start, is you're just feeding it the double, whatever amount it is, of flour and water. Yes?
This is going to be an exponential feed.
Exactly. So you're not just going to be able to feed this once and then make bread, because you have to build your volume, right? You have to keep feeding it until you get the amount, more than the amount that you need, so that you can save some and put in the fridge or save it for later. You need 3/4 of a cup for this recipe. This recipe makes 2.2 pound loaves. And so that's how much you need for 2 loaves. And so that is how you feed it. So let's just do that. Okay, so I'm going to take 1/4 of a cup of start. You do not have to use gloves at home. I'm using gloves because I don't have a sink to wash my hands. And I'll start touching my face and I'll get flour to do it. So we've got 1/4 of a cup of start. That beautiful bouncy start. There's nothing more pretty to me than an active start. It's just way cool. Okay, and then I'm going to take water. So I use 1/4 of a cup. So I'm going to use 1/2 cup of water and 1/2 cup of flour. Now, what kind of flour do you use to feed your start? You can use 50-50. You can just use fresh ground wheat. If you're doing it for health reasons, you can totally do that. You can just use 100% white, whatever floats your boat. Rye makes really sweet starts if you want to use rye, but really it doesn't matter a ton what you use for your start. Now, a whole wheat start will act a little differently. It'll be more clumpy than stretchy, but it will still produce great bread. So no worries about that. Okay. So now I'm going to put 1/2 cup of flour in, and maybe just a little more. So you kind of have to remember, my suggestion is that you just buy a kitchen scale. They're like $11. And bakers use weight, they don't use, or percentages, they don't use volume. I've given you the recipe in volume because most people don't have that, but I think I've decided to stop doing that and just say, get over it and buy a scale. So many recipes are already in grams that it's just more accurate. It's just faster, it's just better to use that. But you're my last group that I'm giving it to in volume, so be grateful. That you can use the volume, but if you're going to use volume, you have to know that when you're doing your start, so water weighs more than flour does. And so it's equal parts flour and water when you're weighing it. But when you're using volume, you have to use a little bit more flour to get that right consistency. So as you watch this, please don't freak out or stress out about exact measurements, because I want you to walk away remembering the consistency, what it looks like, because guess what? This is a live thing. This is not a hamburger at McDonald's, which means it's going to be different. It's going to be different almost every time. There'll be differences because the weather changes. Maybe your start is getting a little deteriorated because you used water that was too warm and you've got to build up your bacteria. There's so many things that could influence it. When we go from spring to summer, I have to use colder water, otherwise it processes faster and your dough will get flat. I mean, there's just so many things. So it's much better for you to learn the language of your dough and the language of your start rather than be so concerned about being exact with all of your measurements. And I know if you're type A, that will drive you crazy, but it's okay. Learning the language of it is a way of being exact, right? Because you can still be exact in the consistency or in the feel of it. It's just a little more vague, but still exact at the same time, if that is possible. Okay, so you're just going to get your fingers in there and you're going to mix this up. You do not want to use metal when scooping or storing your start because it interferes with the bacteria, but you can use wooden spoons, plastic, glass, crockery. In fact, we were watching Miss Marple a few years ago, and they went into the kitchen to question the cook, and up on the shelf was this crock that said starter on it, and I said, everybody look! That is their sourdough start right up there in this crock. So you can use clay stuff, whatever. Okay, so this is the consistency of your start. It's like a thick waffle batter. You don't want it to be like cake mix. Cake mix is way too thin. And if you've already worked with sourdough start and you're used to yours being thinner, there's nothing wrong with a thin start. It's just less food for your bacteria, which means it will activate quicker and you have a smaller window of when your start is active. So if you do a good thickness like this, your start will take about 3 to 5 hours to activate and will stay active for about 2 hours. So that's pretty cool. But doing a thick start is the key to that. That's why I like a thick start, because it just has more food for the bacteria to eat. So what happens when the bacteria and the yeast have processed all the gluten, there's no more starches for them to eat. That's when they go into that hibernation state, and your start, which has doubled in size, starts to fall. So this is a start that has not been refreshed since Thursday night. Well, there's still bubbles. It's still kind of thick, but it has fallen. This is a start I did this morning at about 5:30, and it's doubled in size, and it's really active. It's bubbly. So this is the what an active start looks like. Really bubbly. The number one thing is it's doubled in size. If it hasn't doubled in size yet, then it's not ready. It's got to double in size. And one of the ways you can know that is if you get a rubber band and put it around your jar. So when you feed it, you put the rubber band around, you see where it is, and then you can clearly see once it has doubled. Like, oh yeah, clearly my start is active because it's doubled in size. So that's the first way you know your start's active. The second is that the bubbles are rounded. The surface is rounded on the top, and they're big bubbles coming up from under the surface, and you can kind of watch them pop. It's really cool. Kind of undulates a little bit. A start that has fallen and is not quite ready anymore, it will be foamy on the top and flat and smell acrid. Now you can say all starts smell acrid, but really a start that is active, it smells sour, but it's got a bit of sweetness to it. A start that is over-processed, the fumes will come up and meet your nose hairs. It's like, whoa, okay. So once you get to that point, starts are so cool because it's not like you throw it away. It's not like it's ruined. You just have to feed it again. Feed it again, get it active, and it will leaven your bread. So that's an active start versus an inactive start. Now what if your start looks like this? And you put it in the fridge to store it, and it's got this kind of liquid or black liquid on it. What do you do with it? So what this is just our start that hasn't been, like he said, rejuvenated or refreshed in a long time. So it's settled down, these are all hibernating, and the lactic and acidic acid has separated, and when it gets in the fridge, it reacts to that by turning black. So people tell me all the time, my start went moldy, I threw it away, I need a new start because it was black liquid floating on the top. Don't throw it away. It's still good. It's just the lactic acid reacting to the cold. So you can pour it off, or you can mix it in. It doesn't really matter because it's going to produce more acids as you feed it, right? But it's not gone bad. This is actually called hooch because it smells like alcohol. Yeah, you can come up and smell it after. I won't open the lid now because it'll rot. How do you know if it is moldy? How do you know when it's moldy? If it's not black liquid, what is it? Well, it can go moldy. If it's moldy in the fridge, you will see like fuzzy black on the sides. Usually you usually don't see a start go bad in the fridge, right? Because you're preserving it in the fridge. If it does go bad in the fridge, that's a sign of bad flour, in my experience. That your flour is just not good flour. You need to change your flour. If you let if you have a countertop start and you start to see pink or orangey stuff, that's mold. So anything pink or orange is mold. Now, does that mean you throw your start out? Not necessarily, because if it has enough depth to it, like this doesn't have a lot of depth, but this has a lot of depth. So let's say the top has a rubbery, pinky or is pink liquid, you can just pour or scoop all of that out and you will probably find that all of this doesn't have it. It's the part that's touching the air that's on the surface that's going to go mold. The stuff underneath is not going to mold at all. It's just going to be dormant start. So as long as you get rid of the mold, and if you're worried that you missed something, remember that fish that cleans everything. The bacteria is going to take care of any little tiny piece of mold that may still be in there, and you'll be fine. So storing, there's two ways to store your start. You can store it in the refrigerator, or you can store it on your counter and just have it out fresher every day. So if you store it in your refrigerator, you don't have to feed it a ton unless you're going to use it a lot. This is the rule of thumb. The longer it's been in the refrigerator, the longer it's going to take to wake that bacteria up. So let's say this has been in the fridge for a long time. Let's say it's just been there for a month. Your start's been in there for a month. You won't be able to pull it out of the fridge, feed it, and have it ready in 4 hours. It just will take longer to wake up that bacteria. So you're going to have to pull it out the day before you want your start active and feed it a couple of times until it starts doubling in size. Because it just won't double. You'll feed it and you'll see a few bubbles and that's it. And so you just have to feed it again, maybe wait 12 hours and feed it again until you can get it woken up and it's nice and roaring like a start like this, and then it's ready to go. Now if you want to store it in the fridge but you want to have it ready, then you just have to use it more often, or you have to pull it out of the fridge and you can feed it and then put it back in the fridge. Now, in order to do that, what's going to happen to your start? It's going to double in size. So in order to do that, you have to make sure when you feed it, it's below the halfway mark because it's going to increase. Now, when you put it in the fridge, cold slows bacteria down, heat speeds it up. So putting it in the fridge, after feeding it, it will activate, but it'll take about 3 days. So this is kind of nice because if you do that every few days, your start's always active and you don't have to wait. And you can put it in there and then pull it out the next day and use it and then put it back in the fridge. You just have to be conscious of the fact that it will be cold, so it's going to take just a little bit more time. Or you need to put it with warmer water or whatever. But that's a good way to keep a refrigerator start ready as by feeding it and putting it back in. Now, if you want to do a countertop start, which is what we do because we just use our start so often. We have a big mother bin of our start. This just has to be fed every day. Why? Because the surface, any place that has come in contact with the air, even if you cover it, there's still air in there, right? If you don't feed it regularly, it will start to mold, and you'll get that pink, and you'll get that lovely aroma. And so you just have to feed it. So starts are like pets. They have a memory, they remember when they've been fed, they like routines. So you can actually train your start to be fed every other day and be just fine. If you want to have it out, it'll be low maintenance, but otherwise it needs to be fed every day. Now the nice thing about a countertop start is that you always, for about 4 hours or 5 hours a day, you have a start that's active. So you can make things like pancakes and waffles and muffins and crackers. Oh, the crackers are really good. Pie crusts and cakes. And in fact, I have a sourdough chocolate cake that you can sample over there, that we just make on Saturdays. That's amazing. So if you do that, part of the pain of sourdough is getting the start, thinking ahead far enough to have the start ready. But if you have it on your counter all the time, feeding it, then you have the starts ready, and you have to deal with discard. So what discard is, if I have this on my counter, and I'm going to feed it every day, unless I throw some of it away, I'm going to have a bathtub full in like a week. So you have to take half of it, throw it away, and then refresh it. Or take some of it and make pancakes and then refresh it. So that's the nice thing about a countertop start. What if you go on vacation? Well, a lady in the charging book, she calls it her fiance, and she takes it on vacation with her. She doesn't live on it. Every time I go, she goes, I am not that person. I am way low maintenance. You go on vacation, stick it in the fridge, it's going to be fine. Pull it out again. Now, a fridge or refrigerator start will be more sour because of the cold. So you'll have a warmer start, will be a little more sweet. Now that doesn't mean it won't be sour. It just means it will be more sweet. And the other one will be more of a tangy sour. But it'll be okay putting it in the fridge and then pulling it out again. It's not going to ruin your start as far as the sourness. As you keep it on the counter and feed it, it will warm and sweeten up. All right, so that's about feeding and maintaining your start. Water. So water is important. We mentioned the 3 perfect ingredients. Water is one of them. Water today is far from perfect. Water that comes out of your tap, tons of problems. If you had hard water, then that will make a really dense, heavy loaf. If you have a water softener, then the absence of minerals will not do well because bacteria needs the minerals. If you use distilled water, don't use distilled water because of the absence of minerals. And then, let's say you don't have any of those problems, but you just have tap water. Tap water has chlorine in it. It has chloramine, which is a new thing. Chlorine, I used to say, just fill your water up the night before, and we'll let it sit over that. But chloramine doesn't do that. So you want to use, for maximum efficiency, you can still use your tap water and it'll be okay. But for maximum efficiency, you want either spring water or filtered water for your start. And your bread. So there's no real rules about it. If you don't cover it though, it's not going to raise as well, and it's going to get a crusty film on the top. So you can put a metal lid on it. You just have to make sure it's not going to touch the lid, right? Which you don't want it to do anyway. Now, as far as how loose or how tight, that doesn't matter unless you're going to overfill it. So if you refresh it and it's up to here, then it's a big problem that you have it on tight, because that is a force to be reckoned with, and you may crack your jar. But that's only if you're going to make the mistake of overfilling it. So you can put saran wrap over it, just anything to cut. Cheesecloth might not be great because the air still gets through it, but yeah, it just needs to be covered. It doesn't have to be tight or loose necessarily unless you're going to overfill it. You want to do it loose, but then you wouldn't want to overfill it because it would overflow. So the more start you have when you're doing it, the higher the percentage of your start means that it will be more sour. Find that your start is not performing. Like it did really well, and all of a sudden it doesn't double in size, and you're having issues with it. It could be your bacteria count. The temperature of your water is a big deal. If you get anything over 100, you're going to start killing bacteria. Now that doesn't mean your start's ruined, it just means some of your bacteria are going to die, and if you continue doing that, then your bacteria count will suffer. So what do you do to kind of give your start a little bit of pep? If it's feeling sick, you feed it 100% whole, fresh ground flour, wheat flour, because there's millions more bacteria in that than there is in your white flour, because it's got more nutrients. So if you feed it 100% fresh ground flour, it'll give it a boost. If you feed it rye flour, it will also have that effect. So if you want to doctor your start, feed it fresh whole wheat flour, and that should help it move along. And then I need to talk about water temperature. So if let's say you're in a pinch and you need your start to be ready in 3 hours versus 5 hours, make your water warmer. It will work faster. Or let's say you've got to go somewhere for a long time and you want your start to be ready in 6 hours. Make the water colder, and that will extend. It will take longer to activate. It will extend your lifetime of that. Same with the dough. So the temperature in the room, the temperature of your water is uber important. So I suggest buying a thermometer. I know I'm telling you to buy a lot of things. It's totally worth it, and you'll use it. But you just have to get, there's $6 at Walmart. Like a meat thermometer is fine, as long as it goes up past 100. Meat thermometers I think go to 250. Just so you can tell the temperature of your water, because that's a big deal. The water that you do for your start and the water that you do for your bread. Because if you're unwittingly putting really warm water in there, your start's it's gonna activate fast and it won't be active for very long. Or if you put warm water in your dough, you're gonna wake up and your dough will already be flat and over-processed and good for nothing except to pat in a pan and make flatbread with some herbs. So the water is a big deal. One thing I forgot to do was the water test. So if you're like, I can't remember what Martha said about if my start's ready or not, get a glass of water. This is kind of fun to do with your kids, a little chemistry experiment. And let's take this start that I just barely made. There's some bubbles in it, but not a lot. Because we haven't given that yeast a lot of time. Okay, did you see what happened there? The start sank to the bottom. So if your start is over-processed or under-processed, it will sink because there's no bubbles. There's not enough bubbles in there to float it. Now let's take some of my beautiful, active, stretchy start here. And it's going to float. See that? Isn't that fun? So that's one way that you can, if you're just not sure, is my start ready? That's a surefire way to tell you that your start is good to go. Now, you can mix your bread in a bosh, and you can even double the recipe, make 4 loaves in a bosh. KitchenAid, you cannot double the recipe, but you can use a KitchenAid. You can do it by hand in a metal bowl. So metal bowl is fine for your dough. You just can't leave your start in it for long periods of time. I like to do these. These are called Cambro containers, C-A-M-B-R-O. This is the 6 quart. It's the perfect size for this recipe. Here's the recipe I made this morning. This is the dough. See, it's up to the 5 quart line. The reason I like these over just a bowl is because it has this awesome snappy lids that you can just snap it on, and you can see through it, so you can see where your dough progression is. They're great for starts. They make all kinds of sizes. You can get these at restaurant supply stores, on Amazon. Standard Restaurant in Salt Lake has them. They're great. Cambro, C-A-M-B-R-O. But you can just use a bowl. You can use your bosh. Boshes are great. But I'm going to use this Cambro container. So you've already refreshed your start, right, about 4 hours ago. And now you're ready to make your bread. Sourdough is very rhythmic. So the rhythm of sourdough, it may take you a little bit of time to figure out. So because there's so much to it, there's so much time, you have to figure out what rhythm works best for your schedule. Although it takes 24 hours to make the bread start to finish, your interaction with it is only 15 minutes. Say that to yourself. I make bread in 15 minutes. It's amazing. Exactly. It may seem like a lot because but it's like 3 minutes here and then you leave. And then 5 minutes here and then you leave. So you're constantly coming to your dough and leaving it and coming back to your dough. So finding out a rhythm that works for you is important. What I like to do is do my start in the morning-ish, and then I make the dough, well actually more like afternoon-ish. And then I make the dough before dinner, and then I do all the steps, and then the dough's ready for its final rise overnight, and then I wake up in the morning and do the stuff to bake it. So that works well for me, but find out what works for you. That's what we do at the bakery. We mix our dough at night. We come early in the morning and we bake it. So you've already done your start, so now you're ready to go. Let's look at our recipe here. We're going to start with 5 cups of water, 4 cups of water. I don't usually make this recipe. I'm usually making, 70 loaves at once. So what does the recipe say for water?
2 3/4 cups of water.
3 and what?
3 2/3.
3 and 2/3.
Tell us your proportions in grams.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't do grams just because we bake on such a large scale. We just do pounds. So I'm usually doing like 70 pounds of water, that kind of stuff. Okay, so here's our water. Now we're going to put in our starch. So it's 3/4 cup of starch. I'm going to use this one. So look how beautiful that is. You see those bubbles? See how it's just thick and stretchy? Okay, so that's half cup. And I'm not being excessively precise because I'm demonstrating, and like I said, we're just looking for that consistency, right? Now, if you're going to make it in a bowl, then just starting out is your water test time, because see how that's floating? Oops, I dripped it. Start's really drippy. See, it's floating, so you can see right off, okay, my start is good. All right, so then you just kind of want to break the start up so it's not a big lump. Okay, now we're going to do our flour. So this is the 70% part. I think it's what, 5 cups? 5.5. 5.5. Wow, silence. I can't talk while I measure or else I mess up. Okay. And then this is our fresh ground wheat flour.
So if you're saying white flour, you mean white spring wheat or white hard?
No, I'm meaning the flour that looks white.
I thought that was the extra wheat.
It is, but yeah, okay, I do need to change my verbiage. At the bakery, we just call it white and wheat flour because one looks white and one looks like wheat. But it's white, whole grain, and then freshly ground. So that's what I mean when I say that. And did I do one or two?
No, we did
cups?
one.
Thank you. 2. That's all right. If I did 3, we'll just add more water. It's non-consistency. All right, so now I really enjoy mixing bread by hand. There's just something so therapeutic about it. But if you're going to mix more than 2 loaves by hand, you need a lot of strength. So I wouldn't suggest doing more than 2. It's just a lot of work. So while I'm doing this, let's talk about kneading your bread. So if you're making yeast bread, the instructions will tell you to knead it for like 10 minutes on a board, right? Or 4 minutes if it's in a machine. And why do they tell you to do that? You've got to activate the gluten, yeah. But with sourdough, the start does that for you. Don't be worried if it's really wet, because sourdough is wet. And part of that is because it's a higher hydration, which means the percentage of water to flour is higher than normal bread, because you want a more open crumb. Now your crumb is how big your holes are. So if you look at sandwich bread, is the crumb high or low? It's low, because they're really teeny tiny holes. But if you look at, artisan breads, they can have, it's an open crumb, because you can have big, massive holes in it, right? So that's your hydration, your level of hydration. The bigger the holes, it means you have more water per flour. So our bread is at a kind of a medium hydration, because we like the openness of the crumb, but we want to make sandwiches, right? You don't want the peanut butter plopping out of the mayonnaise on your lap. So we have an open crumb, but it's not really, really open. Okay, so there you go. That is the consistency of your dough. It's pretty darn wet, sticking to my glove. So don't worry, because as it sits, it's going to look like this. And this is, see how different that is? It'll get more stretchy, it'll get less sticky as it sits. So don't worry about it being wet. It's okay if it's wet. Okay, so we've mixed our flour, our water, and our starch. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to let it autolyze. Autolyze is when we let the flour soak up the water and get really ready to bake. The autolyze process is really important. It's about 30 minutes. We're going to let this sit for 30 minutes. Then we're going to come back to it, and we're going to do what? What have we not done yet?
Salt.
Salt. Salt is really important and crucial for sourdough. First of all, because it would taste bad without it. You want it to taste good. Second of all, the bacteria needs the salt. Bacteria can be a little unruly. It can work fast in some areas and not be consistent. The starch slows it down, makes it so that it processes in a uniform way. Like, we know salt preserves. It kind of does that to the thing. It preserves it, makes it uniform. And so it's really important that you use salt. And you'll notice there's a lot of salt. There's like a tablespoon in each loaf. Now, the way we can do that is we use quality salt. This, I think, is like $4. So, you have to pay for quality, but that's a way you can know quality salt from non-quality salt. But real salt is incredible. Celtic sea salt, the Kirtland Himalayan pink salt, those are all good salts. So quality salt, super important. So we're going to let it autolyze for 30 minutes, and then we're going to take a 3/4 cup of water and 2 tablespoons of salt, and we're going to mix it in. So if you didn't think that it was already wet, we're going to make it even more wet, but it doesn't matter, because remember, it's going to sit, and we're going to taste it.
So do you sit and let it dissolve?
So you put it in the water just so that you can work it back into the dough. You don't have to let it dissolve, but if you use the thicker stuff, then you would want to stir it up until it's broken. So we're going to stir it, we're going to put it in there, and then you're going to work it in. All right. Here we go. Because salt is a preservant, you need it to give it that half an hour for the bacteria to work its way into the dough. Otherwise, you're slowing the bacteria down right away. So this just gives it, and you want it to autolyze without the salt. So that autolyze time where it's soaking up and uncoiling the protein strands, you don't want the salt in there for that. So that's why you wait half an hour for the salt. Okay, so we've done that. So the dough is even more stretchy now, just after sitting that small amount of time. So now you've done the salt. So now what we're going to do is we're going to let it sit for another 30 minutes, and then we're going to stretch and fold. So you don't have to knead this bread, but we do fold it because we've got to strengthen those protein strands. And so this folding is pretty easy. You're going to run your hand down the outside of the bowl. You're going to pick it up, and you're just going to stretch it and fold it to the center. Stretch it, fold it, stretch it, fold it. That's it, 3 times. And then you're going to let it sit for another half an hour and do it again. So the stretch and folds are going to be 3 stretch and folds. Now remember, it seems labor intensive, but you're coming to it, and you're going away, you're coming back, just going away. So I like to do this. I like to mix it before dinner. And maybe do the salt before dinner, and then I come back to it after dinner and fold. Then I put my kids to bed, and I fold, and I do something else, and I come back and fold, and then I'm ready to go to bed.
So
you can let it go longer. I tell people if you have to cheat, you can do every 20 minutes, or you can just do 2 instead of 3 if you're in a pinch, because I'm a mom, I know how life gets gets. But it is important to do it at least twice. It makes a big difference. If you don't do the stretch and folds, I've noticed the bread is more dense. So this is what enables it to be more fluffy. Okay, so this is ready to snap the lid on and let it sit overnight. So you want it to be in a place that is not going to be excessively hot or excessively cold, unless you want it to go longer than you put it in the cold, or you want a shorter time, then you put it in a warmer area, and the water also. So the water that you want for room temperature, normal 8 to 10 hour bulk rise is about 72 to 74 degree water. And then for, if you want, Chad Robertson in his book says for every degree that you go warmer, you can like take an hour off of how long the process is. You just have to be really careful, because if this doesn't process long enough, then it will not be as digestible. So we had a story where this lady in Riverdale said, my daughter can eat your bread, she's celiac, it's so great now, she can take her sandwich to school and eat bread just like all the other kids, it's so great. And we said, oh, that's so wonderful, you know, aren't we so awesome? And then we started changing how we processed the bread, and I got a call from her and she said, my daughter can't eat your bread anymore, did you do anything different? And we said, yes, but we won't do that anymore. We realized, wow, this is really powerful stuff. We were taking it and we were putting it in the refrigerator so that we didn't have to mix through the night, so that it would elongate, but we weren't letting it warm up enough so that make sure it was fully processed before we baked it. So there was still too much gluten in there, and that poor little girl was eating it and got a bellyache. And so my husband said, never again. Okay, here you have this beautiful dough. It's a lot like the start. It's doubled in size. You can see these awesome bubbles. The top is rounded just like the start. The bubbles are coming up from underneath. It's got a sour but not too sour smell. And so you know that you're in a good place and you can dump this out and start working with it. Okay, so one tool that is really amazing is called a dough scraper. Basically, it's just a spatula without a stick that you can hold in your hand. Sourdough is really sticky, and when it hardens, it is brutal. So it's not like typical dough, it doesn't just dump out. So this makes it so you can work with and handle the dough in an easy way.
You don't put flour on it?
I do put flour on it. I don't put flour on it at the bakery, but when I'm demonstrating, I put flour on it. I totally forgot. So let's put some flour on it. The reason is you don't want flour, unprocessed flour on it, right? Because it won't be digestible. So at the bakery, we don't use flour. But if you're just starting out, I tell people, use flour because this is not normal dough. It's sticky, it's hard to work with. So once you get used to it, you won't need flour. But at first, use flour or use cornmeal or use rice flour if you have wheat problems, or you could even use water or oil. But you probably will need something at first. So let me just move this over. Another great tool is a bench knife. These you can just get at Walmart. Okay, so this is your 2-loaf recipe right here. So you're going to dump it out, and you're going to put it on a surface, and then just take your bench knife or a knife, and you're just going to cut it in half. So now what we're going to do, this is the part that's called the bench rest. And you just manhandled it to pop some of the bubbles. So you're going to let it sit for another 30 minutes and get used to being the size that it is and grow some more bubbles before you try to work with it. So this is the bench rest, 30 minutes. This is where you can know if your dough is processed enough. When you pick it up, if it has some give, but it's not too tight, this is good. This is good dough. It's not over-processed. It's not under-processed. If you pick it up and you go like this, like, way too much gluten in there, right? You can't even work with it. It's so stiff. You got to let it sit a few more hours. You want it to have give to it like that. But you also don't want it dripping all over the place. That's over-processed. dough. When it's over-processed, you can still bake it. Like if you took the lid off in the morning and it was flat or even concave, you can still do it. It still may work. It just means you don't have any time. You have about 2 hours where, like your start, where it's ready, but it can still sit and be okay. But once the middle falls in, you're like, okay, bake this stuff right now. It is ready to go in. All right, so you let it sit for 30 minutes. Oh, well, here we go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shape it. You can put this in loaf pans if you would like. You'll have you'll have the smaller crumb in loaf pans, but it makes great loaf bread, sandwich bread. You won't get the beautiful golden crusty crust as much because as you will baking it in the Dutch oven, but it's still great. So you can do that. I would probably do 3. You might be able to. That should probably fit in a loaf pan. So you could probably do 2 sandwich loaves out of this. What we're going to do today is I'm going to show you how to make boules, which is the round ones that we do at our bakery. Bake it in a Dutch oven, and so let's shape it. Now I could put this in there like this, and it would raise, but it would look ugly and like a puddle. We don't want it to look like that. We want it to raise up and out and break open on the top. So in order to do that, we have to tension it. We have to create tension in the middle so it does that. So this is how you do it. People get really intimidated by this. It's not difficult. It really is not difficult. You're going to pick it up and you're going to kind of shake it, and then you're just going to roll it. Now when you roll it, you're not digging your fingers in because you're going to pop those beautiful bubbles. You're caressing it with your fingers. Roll once, roll again, and then you're going to take your bench knife and you're going to scoot it. See how that tucks that in? Or you're just going to turn it like this. You're just going to tuck and turn until you've got this beautiful circle. Isn't that beautiful? See how springy that is? That's going to grow up and out. Oh, look at those bubbles. It's got the bubbles. So that is tensioning. I'm going to do it one more time. Here we go. So you're going to take it, just going to kind of shake it out a little, and then you're just going to roll. You may, if you have to roll it like 4 or 5 times, then it's on its way out. If it's not holding its form, it's over-processed. But you should only have to roll it like, you could even roll it once, 2 to 3 times is the most. So we're going to tuck that in, see that? How easy that is. Tuck it so that it folds under. So I didn't even have to turn that one, but you can tuck and turn like that. There you go, that's it. You're just going to roll, turn, roll, tuck it in, and you've got a beautiful boule. So you don't want this to double in size, but you want it to almost double in size. So you can just get a bowl. This is a 10-cup Tupperware bowl. This is what we do. And then we oil some parchment, and then we stick our bread on it. Put it in there, and then you cover it, and you let it raise for anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes. Now, how do you know when it's done raising? It will have almost double in size, and it will still have its rounded shape. If you take the lid off and it is really high and it's flat and it's got these huge bubbles, you let it go too long. You can't let it give its last full measure of devotion to the proofing, or it'll have nothing left to give in the oven, and you'll put it in and it'll just bake and it'll go and it'll go flat. So it's important that it raise, but it's important that it not overproof. So it's the same as the start. You want it still to have that rounded shape, not flat. And so that's what we do. Now, if you don't want to do it this way, there's things called proofing baskets. That's what most people do. We just don't want to buy 300 proofing baskets because they're kind of expensive. But if you're just doing it for home use, they're great. They're made of wicker and like a basket, and you put it in belly up, so you turn it around, and it gets the imprint of the basket on it. So you've seen bread that has that, and then you dump it out, and you score it, and you put it in the oven, or dump it into the Dutch oven. We like to use the parchment just because we are using Dutch ovens, and we make, jalapeno cheddar and cinnamon. If we didn't use the parchment, we'd have to clean it out every time, and that would be super labor intensive. So you can put it in there without anything, and it's fine. fine. But we like to use parchment. It also helps because the Dutch oven's hot, and you can hold it by the paper and put it in and then take it out. So that's why we like parchment. But you could definitely just use a normal bowl, get some cheesecloth, dust it with some rice flour, put it in there, and then dump it out into your Dutch oven. You don't have to use the parchment. That's just how we do it. So when you set your bread for proofing, you want to turn your oven on, and you want to put your Dutch oven, preheat your Dutch oven in the oven, because you want this sucker to be hot when you put the bread in it. The reason why, when you use this cast iron like this, it traps all the moisture in, and you get this really hot heat, and it gives you a great oven spring. Now, oven spring is that 15 minutes after you put it in that the yeast is still alive. So you put it in, and the bread springs up before the yeast dies. And so in order to get a good oven spring, you need it to be hot. And that's why sometimes your recipe will say, put it on 400 for 10 minutes and then lower it to 350. That's why they want to get a big oven spring but not burn the bread. So you're going to want to do 465. Put your Dutch oven in there for the time that you're proofing it so that it is hot and ready. Then when it's ready, you're going to pull it out, and you are going to score your loaf of bread. So that means just cut lines in it. So you can do 3, you can do a box, you can make a beautiful design with the wheat, shaft of wheat on there, whatever you want to do. The reason we score it is if you don't cut it, it's going to break open somewhere, and most of the time it breaks open around here. So when you cut the bread, the whole bottom part comes off, and that's not fun. So we want to encourage it to break open in the top, so you have these beautiful ridges of breaking open the top of the loaf, not around it. So you score it. You're going to put it in your hot Dutch oven. Of course, you need to have really good protection because Dutch ovens burn. You're going to sit it in. You're going to take some water and go sprinkle, sprinkle. Put the lid on and bake it for 35 minutes. Now, after 35 minutes, you should be able to take the lid off, and it's golden brown. We used to bake it at 500 for 25 minutes and then take the lid off to brown the top. But we realized if we just lowered the temperature and elongated the time, we didn't have to take the lid off, and it wouldn't burn. It would be golden brown inside. So 465, 35 minutes. Of course, everybody's oven's different, so you're going to have to play with it and see what works for you. Yes?
So you keep the parchment paper in there?
Yep, you keep it in. And these edges right here that are sticking out, they'll turn brown and maybe black, but it's fine. This is a 10-inch, 4-quart Dutch oven. These, after COVID, got really expensive. We used to be able to get them for $35 online, and now they're like $60, $70. But if you go to Academy Sports and Outdoors, I think it's called, we just discovered they sell them for $25, and they don't have the legs on the bottom. And so that was really great. Now, if you have a Dutch oven already that's bigger, you can use it. You just may need to add more dough and adjust your temperature for more mass. If it's bigger, because it will, otherwise, if it's big and you use the same amount, you'll get a really small loaf, but if that's okay, you can do that. Yes?
When using just loaf pans, do you proof it in the loaf pan?
Yes, thank you for saying that. If you're using loaf pans, you can proof it. Actually, you could even do the whole bulk rise in the loaf pan if you wanted overnight, as long as it was covered tight. Or you can just put it in there and let it raise. Yeah. Now, if you don't have a Dutch oven, you can use a combo cooker. You can use enamelware. Enamelware works great. A Pampered Chef has stoneware that you can use. You can use a pizza stone and put a pan of water in there if you wanted to. What else can you do? A crock pot?
Yeah, I use my crock pot. Crock pot broke and just hot.
Nice. And the lid, great. Yeah, I've never heard that before. Yes.
So you're talking about like a pizza stone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then,
You would just put this, once it's raised, proofed on the pizza stone, score it, and bake it. It won't be as good as if it was in a Dutch oven, but it'll still be great. It'll do good. Yes.
So then, what kind of oil? You oil the parchment unfortunately.
No. So her question is, she's used recipes for sourdough that have honey and egg and oil and all these different things. Okay, so this is the awesome thing about sourdough. You do not need sugar, you do not need honey, you do not need all of these things that we typically put into bread to make it so they, like, you know, when the big wheat, whole wheat came back, like in the 80s, everyone was putting in gluten flour and lemon and potato flakes and all these things to get the bread to raise well. You don't need any of that. The time when you will see sugar and oil and eggs in sourdough is when you're making things like rolls and you want them to be extra light and fluffy soft. So yeah, that's great.
But it doesn't mess up like.
It doesn't mess up no, it doesn't mess up the process of fermentation. If you want to dehydrate your starch, it's very, very easy. Take a container like this or something that has tall edges, even a bucket would work. You make your starch, you coat the edges, you make it so they're not too clumpy or thick, and then you pour off the excess and you just let it sit. And they'll just dry and fall to the ground. And you pick it up and put it in an airtight container. Most people, we love to slice our bread hot, right, and eat it. Well, if you do that with sourdough, it will still be doughy in the middle, unfortunately, because it continues to cook internally. So take your loaf of bread out and wait for about an hour. Now, storing is really important. If before you put it in a bag, you want to make sure it's completely cooled, or else it will mold. I like to pre-slice mine and put it in the freezer. If I'm not going to eat it right away, I like to put a bunch in the freezer, then you can just pull out slices at a time. This bread will mold, sadly. There's no preservatives in it. But I've seen this bread last for like 4 weeks and not mold, and I've seen it mold after a week. So it really just depends on the weather, you know, how much moisture's in the air, if you put it in the bag too hot, all of that stuff. But I want you to tell you, when you find your bread and it's moldy earlier than you thought, don't be sad. I want you to rejoice and say, I'm eating real food. Because if it's real food, it's going to mold. If it's Costco bread, you can buy it and let it sit for 5 months and it doesn't mold, but that's not real food. That has chemicals and preservatives in it. So be thankful and rejoice that you're eating real food, and cut the mold off and toast it, and it'll be great. Toasting solves all your problems. Yeah, so let's talk about waffles. Are divine. They're really awesome. Great thing to do with this card. The crackers, the recipe is there. It's really great. So thank you so much for coming. I'm excited for you to go. Now I'd like you to promise that you'll try this in the next 30 days, because if you wait, then you'll forget, and then it'll be like, oh no, I can't really remember. So just try it once, get over the hurdle. And when doing something you've never done before, it's always hardest to start. So just do it once, and then you'll say, oh, I've done it. It's great.